Hey guys, it's Tomatoda. Today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a Drifloon cane charm. As simple as this looks, there's a few parts that you might struggle with because I definitely did. So just a warning, this cane is not entirely a walk in the park. As always, we first start with very well conditioned clay. Then roll out the purple and yellow clay on the thickest setting of your pasta machine and then cut them into about 1-inch squares. We need 4 purples and 4 yellows. Then layer 2 purples on top of each other, 2 yellows on top of that, and finally finish off with 2 more purples. Remove the severe excess clay on the sides. As you can see, my 1-inch square guesstimation was absolute shit. Now, we need to cut this block in half. However, because I suck at cutting straight down, I like to make guidelines to follow just for accuracy. After slicing, add 2 strips of yellow clay in between, and when you attach the other side of the block, make sure everything aligns perfectly on the front and back, making an X. If you look on Google Images, there are Drifloons with skinny long X's and fat short X's. That is up to your preference, but I'm going to use this 2-layered scrap to evenly measure and mark the ends of my X because that's how I want my X to be shaped. One note is if you're going to use the scrap clay as a measurement like I am, make sure to use the purple scrap and not yellow because yellow stains everything. So watch out for the yellow and try not to touch it as much as possible. Pretend it's pee-pee. You don't want pee-pee on your hands, right? Add 2 more layers of purple clay around the X. By the way, I'm going to refer to this as my X block. After the layers are done, set aside the X block while we work on the eyes. With the black clay, roll it into a thicker rod and shape it into an oval by pressing down on one side. You want to make sure that the oval is evenly shaped and sized throughout the length. Then taking a thick sheet of purple clay, wrap it around the black. I did have to kind of pre-roll the first curve because it wouldn't bend so easily. I also want to mention that we will be reducing the eyes until it's twice the length of the X block. So lengthwise here, you want it to be similar to the X block, but girth-wise, you want it to be twice the size because after reducing, it'll be half the girth and twice the length, if that makes sense. After wrapping the eyes with purple clay, it's still an oval shape, so we need to cut it into a circular cylinder because that makes it easy to reduce. At least it does for me. If you know how to reduce an oval shape accurately, then go ahead. But I'm gonna do circular. So after that, take some white clay and roll it into a very skinny string. After measuring and marking where the peak of the ovals are, lay the white string on top and make sure it doesn't move around. Then start reducing until it's about twice the length of the X block. As you can see, the string on top shifted around slightly while reducing. So following that line, twist your cane back until it's straight enough. Then cut the cane down right in the middle and now we have 2 eyes. Cut off the excess ends on the other side. For those of you wondering what I do with excess parts, I try to salvage whole colors as much as possible to reuse again. Taking our eye cane, cut off the white lines at the top. To add the eyes, I'm going to be doing a lot of measuring on the front and back side of the cane because I want accuracy. You definitely have the freedom to freehand it, but good luck. Essentially, we need to cut off the right and left chunk of our X block about 1 or 2 millimeters away from the yellow X, and then also cut off one side of each eye cylinder about 1 millimeter away from the eye. Then measure the middle of the X and the middle of the eyes and use that as an indicator to align the face together. Always check that the back side matches too. For the rest of the face, you just have to Tetris the background together by slicing and adding chunks. Do whatever is comfortable for you, but personally, I think adding blocks of squares or rectangles is the simplest. The worst part though is if you mix your own colors and then you run out of clay. Like if this purple color came straight out of the bag in this shade, I wouldn't have any problems. But I made this shade of light purple by mixing it with white with no pre-measurements like an idiot. I just tossed in whatever amounts of white and purple, so that means if I run out, I have to shade match a new batch of light purple, which fucking sucks. So for this project, I did make sure to make a lot of light purple, but there are instances where it's still not enough. So keep that in mind. Afterwards, use a 1-inch circle shape. You can use a cookie cutter or like a tape roll. This thing here is from a ramen bottle, but make a circular outline on the front and back and start cutting off the excess clay. When doing this part, also check the back side because sometimes you miss. In that case, just cut on the line, but taper off as you reach the very bottom, since the bottom is actually the front side, which is already cut along the line, right? So remember to taper off. Once that is finished, smooth out the edges by rolling it out a little bit. If you need to, you can add more sheets of clay around the whole circumference. I decided to do one more sheet, but do as you see fit. For the clouds on the head, make some measurement marks in the middle of each eyes because this will be the length of the clouds. Taking a boba straw or whatever tool that is appropriate size, mark in between the right eye and the middle of the face. Then using that boba straw, cut straight down. Even if I don't show it on camera, by the way, please assume that I also made measurements on the back side as I've been showing you throughout this video. For the second cut, it'll be overlapping the first cut, but placed a tiny bit lower. Taking white clay, roll it into a rod that is the same thickness as the boba straw and place the first rod into the right hole. Then using the boba straw again, cut into that piece so that we can add the second white rod into the left hole. Outline the curvature on the top of the head and then cut off that excess. The third cloud lump that's in Drifloon's head, we will not be doing that here. So instead, take a skinny string of white clay and place it where the ends of the cloud should be, above the middle of the left eye. Then at the bottom of the Drifloon, add 2 more skinny strings of white clay. This is to indicate where the bottom portion starts and ends. If you're measuring according to like the X, it might be different than mine, depending if you decided to go with a longer yellow X or a shorter yellow X. Now, time to reduce. Squeeze everything equally all around until it is the size that you want it to be. I do have a video going over reducing and other people have made videos on that too, so go check that out if you're not familiar with this technique. At the end, smooth out the cane. Time to cut the cane in half to see the damage. And not gonna lie, I was pleasantly surprised to see that it wasn't bad at all because I'm always doubting myself. I don't know why. Now this part of the cane really sucked doing. Picking a new appropriately sized straw or cutter, something that matches the 2 cloud lumps here, make an indication all along the cane for your straw to follow along, parallel to the white string. Then we use those lines to carve out a new dent and try to remove as much of the white indication clay line as much as possible, but also be careful not to cut in too deep. Taking a rod of white clay that's the same size as straw, fill up that gap we just made and make sure it's in there snugly. Make another measurement at the center of the 2 clouds here and mark an indication all along the length. Then taking a thick sheet of white clay, we're going to slice it at an angle all the way to the end so that we end up with a Eiffel Tower type of acute triangle. Add the base of the triangle onto the side of the cloud here, making sure that it's attached pretty well only on one side because we still have to curl up the tip of the triangle, which is like the wisp portion. And not gonna lie, this part went pretty terrible for me. Okay, so here my camera stopped filming and I also had camera focusing issues, so I'm going to reenact what happened. Please pretend that it happened for the first time. Using the smaller straw, cut a crevice along the end of the wisp and the indicator we made just before. Then fill it up with the white clay rod and using a tool, blend in the wisp with the clay rod. One last straw cut will be made in the middle here, just enough that it fills up the rest of the gap. And look, for this cloud portion thing, this might not have been the best way to go about this whole shit because it definitely sucked doing, but every other method I thought of sucked even more. Anyways, fill up the rest of the gap with clay and lightly push everything in together. The hardest part is finally over. Congratulations. Now we have to shave off the markers at the bottom by just slicing it all the way through to give it a flat bottom. Then, layering 2 long thick sheets of purple clay on top of each other, mark an indication that's about the same thickness as the bottom portion of the Drifloon that we just cut off. Then, starting at the marker point, tilt the blade at an outward angle and slice down on both sides so that we end up with a trapezoid. Finally, attach that bottom to the Drifloon. Now, let's slice. You don't want to slice it too thin because we will have to drill holes in these, but I'm gonna be honest, I did fuck up a little bit because as you can see, there are a lot of air gaps in between. I didn't pay attention when it came to layering the clay. When you layer, it's very important to make sure that it's all airtight because if there's air trapped in between, you get these kind of cracks, but not a huge deal because we can somewhat fix it by reshaping and condensing the clay after slicing, or even using a tool to blend it in. For the cloud area, I thought it would be fun to use a bigger ball tip tool to create texture while covering up the gaps. Then finally, once more, flip up the ends of the wisp. This is the last cut for the cane. Taking a zigzag blade, cut the bottom of the Drifloon. If you don't have a zigzag blade, get one. I'm just kidding. You can manually cut out triangles with your blade. Before baking, poke holes at the center top and also the center of the side crevice. Then bake your canes in your oven according to the instructions on the packaging. After it is finished baking and has cooled off, we will clean it with some acetone on a cotton swab. This is to get rid of dust, specks, and unwanted texture. As you can see, the yellow bleeds a lot, so don't clean the entire thing with the same swab. Do it by sections. So first the yellow mouth, then using the other tip of the cotton swab, clean the purple face and the sides. Then with a new tip, clean the whites of the clouds and the sides of the cloud. Then to remove all of the bleeding on the face, I recommend using acetone or alcohol on a cotton pad and give it a good quick swipe. Using a hand drill, preferably an electric hand drill so you don't torture your hands, start drilling a hole from the top of the Drifloon and go straight down. The drill bit I'm using here is only slightly larger than the flathead eye pins that I'm going to be using later. In order to make sure there's no blockage, you will have to go through the hole a couple of times. The drill does get a bit hot when in action, so I think it causes the clay to kind of melt. Next, using a drill bit slightly larger than before because this hole needs to match the thickness of my lace yarn later on. Drill a hole side to side, and just a warning, you might have to re-drill the hole that goes from top to bottom after this if the side to side hole melts the clay a bit again and causes blockage again. For the Drifloon arms, I did have to experiment the most on this portion. So first of all, I recommend using black lace yarn. Second of all, keep in mind the thickness of the yarn. I originally drilled a side-to-side hole to match my lace yarn, but then I thought it looked too thick, so I bought this skinnier lace yarn at Hobby Lobby. This one is a size 10, and I think maybe this one is a size 5. But the problem I came across when using the thinner yarn was that I had to do multiple knots if I wanted to keep things in place because the holes were too large. And even the existing hole in my bead was too large for just one knot to do the job. But multiple knots did not look very good. This knot here in particular was also harder to repeat more than once due to the placing. However, with the thicker yarn, I only had to do one knot on the body and for the bead to stay in place. Anyways, taking the yarn, make a knot on one of the ends. Then thread it through a needle and string in a heart bead, making sure that the bead is facing the right direction. I bought these heart beads on Etsy. It was the closest thing that I could find to teeny tiny yellow heart beads at the time. Then measure how long you want your Drifloon arm to be and create a knot there. Pull your threaded needle through the side of the Drifloon and make a knot that's as flush to the body as possible on the other side. Add in the last bead, making sure that it's facing the right direction again, and make a knot the same distance as your first arm. Also make sure that your beads don't fall or slip out of your knot. Then cut off the ends, and since this is a cotton yarn, not acrylic, I can't just burn the ends to seal it. So using glue similar to E6000, dab the ends in the glue and roll it in between your gloved fingers. It works really well to seal in the yarn and to make it look neater. This glue does dry up quickly, so you'll probably have to squeeze out fresh glue every 1 to 2 Drifloons. Also, each time there's like white residue left on the glove, so if you also have that, I recommend using new sections of the glove to roll the knots if you want it to look fresh and clean. The final step to this project is inserting the flathead pin. For some Drifloons, the pin does go in easy, and for some, it does not go in as easy. Most likely, that's because the string is in the way, but just force it through and that works. Then finish the tip by rounding it off. I'm using my looper tool here, and ta-da! Drifloon charms are ready to kidnap your kids. Just kidding. Apparently, according to Bulbapedia, that is a misconception because Drifloons are too light in weight to kidnap anything. Another thing I want to mention is that I saw this Pokemon card and it looks like Drifloon has a butthole. So you can kind of think of this thing here as like a hemorrhoid. Okay, bye.